Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. It's truly a blessing and an honor to be here with all of you at the Pearls Conference. I just want to say that I am not worthy of being a speaker amongst the many luminaries that are speaking here today. And so I just want to say first my apologies to you for speaking in your presence and speaking in the presence of people who I consider my teachers. But I also have learned that when you are asked to share something, that from whatever capacity you have, it's from adab to simply comply with the request. And so for that reason, I'm here, and I beg your forgiveness. This topic of navigating hardship and taking our lessons from the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is probably one of the subject matters that will come up in our lives, over and over and over and over again. And so when we talk about this subject matter, it's something that we actually need the reminder. We need this reminder over and over and over and over again. There's a great wisdom in hardships. There's a great wisdom in the difficulties that we go through. There's a great wisdom in the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I recently heard a beautiful story, and I don't have any of the names to the story, but I'll tell you the subject matter of the story. That's what I have retained from the story. About a shaykh who sat with three of his disciples, three of his students. And he asked them a question: if you could change something, one thing about this world, what would it be? The first student said, I would end poverty. There would not be a single hungry person in the world. This is a suffering that I would seek to have eliminated. If I could just simply make a wish and have it changed, it would be this. Then he asked the second student, and the student said, I would end infighting, like bloodshed, wars, conflicts, where innocent lives are lost. I would end all of this type of fighting so that we could experience peace in this world. And then he asked the third student, what would you change? And the student said, I wouldn't change a single thing. I wouldn't change anything. Because for me to change something would be for me to change the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He is more wise than I am. He is the all-wise. Instead, I would simply respond to what Allah has decreed in the world with what He loves. So I wouldn't change a single thing. And the shaykh told the third student that you, inshallah, will be the teacher after me because you have really understood what it is that I have come to teach. From the beautiful names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Alim, Al-Hakim, the all-knowing and the all-wise. And so we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't just know everything that exists. He knows the infinite possibilities of everything that does not exist. All the ifs and whatabouts and if onlys that could possibly occur to our thoughts and our minds, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more aware of them than we are. And so, in the words of Imam Ghazali, nothing in the realm of possibility is better than what was. No hardship that occurs, that has occurred, could have ever been any better than it actually was. This is part of our iman. This is part of our belief. And to really hold on to it without doubt is to have certainty in the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so today, inshallah, as I talk about navigating hardships, I'm going to, on one side, talk about the virtues that we learn from the example of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ when it comes to hardships. These are virtues that we ourselves need to develop within ourselves. We have to cultivate these virtues. Every time there's a difficulty, every time there's a hardship, that's an opportunity to cultivate these prophetic virtues. And at the same time, we're going to talk about how these virtues actually address different spiritual diseases that would seek to take us away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as we navigate these hardships. What's very beautiful about this is that the virtues that we cultivate, they give us the spiritual fortitude not to be overwhelmed by the hardships, not to be overcome by them. And so this is something that, it's good for us. Yeah, it's good for us spiritually, it's good for us emotionally, it's good for us psychologically. There's only blessing in following the example, I would say purification, mercy, and blessing, and following the beautiful example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So the first virtue that I wanted to address was having a good opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That in the face of hardships, in the face of difficulties with great pain, we need to hold on to the best opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we can. So we don't assume bad things about Him. We don't have doubts about Him. We don't despair in Him. These are D's, right? I'm going to summarize at the end, but there are, I like to call them the D's that are the wasawis of shaitan or of our nafs. So the first two would be doubts in Allah and also despair in Allah, to give up hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet's wife Aisha, Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha, she asked the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam once, was there a day more difficult for you than the day of Uhud? And we know that on the battle of Uhud, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was wounded, he was physically wounded, the Muslims experienced great fear and losses of lives on that day. So this was a very difficult moment in Islamic history. And so when Sayyidah Aisha is asking him, was there a day more difficult than this one? Look at what his response is. He said, yes, indeed, people hurt me greatly. And the worst of it was on the day of Aqaba. On that day, I presented to Abd Yalil and Mas'ud and Habib, and they did not respond to me in the way that I wanted. I found myself in a state of grief and sadness. I did not realize where I was until I reached Qarn al-Tha'alib. So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in this situation, he's actually describing something which is what we have come to know, the events that took place in Ta'if. And one of the evidences of the magnitude of the trauma that he experienced on that day is he doesn't even say, the children stoned me in the streets, or people yelled at me, or people hurt me. He doesn't even say that part. He says, I did not realize where I was until I reached Qarn al-Tha'alib. This comes after a year of grief and sadness, after the loss of his beloved wife, Sayyidah Khadija radiallahu anha, and the loss of his uncle Abu Talib. And, to be ridiculed and mocked by adults is one thing, but to be harmed by children is a whole other level of psychological and emotional pain. Because children they're on fitrah, they're sinless. So to make children do something evil, there's an extra added element of difficulty in that. And so out of pure exhaustion and out of the weight and the gravity of what he had gone through, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ makes the famous dua. And if we were to study the dua, we take so many lessons from it. In this dua, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ calls upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but he does not complain about Allah to Allah. He complains about himself to Allah. And that's the difference. This is someone who did not have doubts about Allah, when he's coming to Allah with the complaint, it's about his own capacity and his own weakness. And he says, "O Allah, to you I complain of my weakness and my humiliation before men. You are the most merciful of all those who have shown mercy. You are the Lord of the humble, and you are my Lord." So I'm just going to pause here. He complains about his own weakness. He complains about the difficulty of what people have done. And then he affirms a beautiful opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He calls upon Allah, the most merciful of all those who have shown merciful, the Lord of the humble. And then he says, "And you are my Lord." So when we go through hardships and the difficulty is great, we should, if we want to complain to Allah, let us complain to Allah about ourselves. That we feel ourselves weak and incapacitated in the face of what's in front of us, and that we need Him, and that we affirm His goodness, we affirm His love, we affirm His mercy. We're holding on to a beautiful opinion of Him. We're not coming to Him with, "Why did you do this to me?" We're coming to Him with, "We need you so I can deal with this test in the way that you love." And then he says, "To whom do you entrust me? To a stranger who receives me with hostility, or to a close relative? You have given power over me. Yet as long as you are not angry with me, I do not care, but your protection is easier for me. I seek refuge in your face by that which all darkness is illuminated, and from all the affairs of this world and the hereafter are rightly guided. May it never be that I incur your wrath or be subject of your anger. It is your right to test until you are content, and there is no power nor strength except through you." We could probably spend over an hour just going through every line of this dua and to take the beautiful lessons and gems from spiritually the state at which the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is turning his affair over to Allah. In Arabic, we would call this tafweed, right? When he says, "If you are not angry with me, then I do not care. You have a right to test me until you are pleased," right? So this is him turning his affair over to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what's amazing about this dua is the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he takes his sadness and his grief and his doubts about himself, and he takes it to Allah with a good opinion of Him, with hope in Him. And this is a protection from two other major pitfalls that happen during hardships, which is to despair in the mercy of Allah, right? Ablasa Iblis, to despair, and also to have doubts about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself. So this is a lesson that we take to ourselves, for ourselves. We need to take our sadness and our grief in the hardship, the pain that we're feeling, and love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through that time. Love Him, cling to Him, hold on to a beautiful opinion of Him through all of that pain. Don't let any whisper tell you anything that is a doubt about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or make you, lessen the hope that you have in Him. Inna ma'al usri yusra, that truly and verily with hardship comes ease. Imam Ibn Ajiba, he says about this verse in his allegorical commentary, that one who holds on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this way, Allah takes them from mujahada, which is to struggle, to mushahada, which is to witness Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself. And that's one of the secrets and the beautiful gifts that can come to a person in a time of hardship, is this ease that comes with being with Allah, ma'iyatullah, right? So the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, after this particular incident, he's not just taken to a sort of spiritual mushahada, he's actually taken for Isra and Mi'raj. He's actually taken and he witnesses what he witnesses in the unseen realm of whether it's leading the prophets in prayers in Bayt al-Maqdis, or then going into the heavens and meeting the other prophets and seeing the realities of paradise. And then the peak of all of that, after this low moment, he affirmed a good opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? He faced Allah with love and devotion, and Allah took him to a place where no other creation had been taken to before, not even the angels. And he gets to have a conversation with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a place where even Jibreel alayhi salam cannot pass. He's taken to mushahada. And it's said that when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came back from this beautiful gift, that he was never the same after that, meaning he had been fortified. And from the secrets actually of the prayer being taken from 50 and then less than that and then less than that and then less than that, it's said that Musa alayhi salam, he would continuously send the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam back to ask for less prayers, right? Because as prayer was revealed at that time. And every time he'd see that when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and he's returning, he has more light in him. So he's sending him back to get more light and back again and more light. Why? Because he's in the presence of the divine. And that's one of the gifts of holding on to a beautiful opinion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when we're overwhelmed, is that by experiencing the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not in the Isra and Mi'raj, that's for the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but being with Allah, remembering Allah all the time in our pain, that this remembrance puts light in our own hearts. And that is an ease that we need, especially in times of hardship. And it actually helps us navigate this period of hardship. The second virtue that we need to cultivate in the face of our hardships is patience. In patience, we see different examples of patience, but one of them, again, happens in Ta'if itself. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ left after the people had attacked him while he was walking, and his feet bled, his noble feet bled upon the earth and upon his sandals, they were shredded. In this condition, where people and children are attacking him in the street, the angel Jibreel comes to him and says, "Do you want me, if you would like, I can take the mountains from both sides of the city and crush these people between the mountains." And if someone had attacked you or me, and with stones in the street, sending their children, sending a village upon us, most of us, if not all of us, would respond with anger. We would be angry about this. And one of the D's that we have to really be careful about is destructiveness, right? Because this is one of the traps of shaitan. Instead of solving a situation, destroy it. Destroy the whole thing. Say something destructive, right? Because that's what shaitan wants. He wants us as a human race to be destroyed. So he wants us to destroy each other. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ had the option, and he was very entitled to have these people destroyed because of what they did. And no one would have said that it was unjust. Everyone would have affirmed they deserved it. But the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he had patience. And as my teachers have taught me, that anger actually put in the right place leads to courage. It also leads to magnanimity and forgiveness. Anger put in the right place leads to magnanimity and forgiveness. And so rather than being destructive, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was constructive. And he said, it may be that after these people pass away, that generations after them will accept Islam. So he had hope in the reformation of these people, that they would actually be guided, right? This is his prayer for the ummah, and it was answered for them. So we learn that through patience, this virtue of patience, that we ward off a particular quality, which is destructiveness from the nafs. And rather we establish constructiveness. We want to establish people on that which is good rather than seeking revenge, even when it seems like we have every right to. The Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, the scholars, they said that the patience that he had to exert in avoiding what the wife of Al-Aziz was calling him to was more than the patience that he had to practice when he was thrown into the well. Because when he was in the well, there's no choice but patience. He has no choice. He must simply stay there and wait for an opening, right? So in circumstances where we don't have any choice except to endure the hardship, right? Patience is sometimes easier. So for example, if someone's beloved family member passes away, right? You can't bring them back to life, right? We know that. And so sometimes the patience that a person has after loss comes to them a lot easier than maybe the patience of if they have to go through a divorce, where there's many choices open to them. And they're still going to lose this person, but in a very different way. And there's a lot of choices where they can either practice destructiveness or they can turn towards desires and again create harm for themselves and others in the world. And so the patience of the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam in avoiding what the wife of Al-Aziz was calling him to was more, to the extent that he makes the dua, "Oh Allah, prison is dearer to me than what they call me to." So he would rather be in a much different situation, cut off from the whole world, than to fall into a particular sin that's displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for us, in hardships, that's actually when shaitan may come and make certain desires seem like a way out, right? A person is going through something, they just want to feel better. It's hard. They want to feel better, so that's when the desire comes to them. A desire they've never practiced before. But in their weak moment, that's when shaitan is right there ready to say it. But look at what Yusuf alayhi salam, the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, he says, "Prison is dearer to me than what they call me to." And so for us, we have to practice patience also in cutting off the calls of such desires to the extent, how did he cut it off? His environment had to change. He actually went to prison. And sometimes we have to do that with ourselves. Whatever that desire is, to cut it off. Don't put it in front of you and say, "I'm going to avoid it." No, remove it from your environment. We have to practice patience to develop a different lifestyle where that desire doesn't have power over us. And in that patience is a mujahada. But in that mujahada, there's also the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, "Inna ma'al usri yusra." The third is to face our struggles and our hardships, not just with, inshallah, a good opinion of Allah, that we turn to Him in dua, that we recognize our incapacity, we go to Him over and over and over again, and that we struggle to restrain ourselves from whatever is displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whether that's destructiveness or our desires. But a third level which takes it up a notch. And this is where I want to say we should have glad tidings from our hardships. Opportunity knocks in our hardships. And that's where we have an opportunity to practice beauty and ihsan. Beauty. Inna Allah jameel wa yuhib al-jamal. Truly Allah is beautiful and He loves beauty. And part of us cultivating beauty is within ourselves spiritually, right? Ihsan is spiritual excellence. I don't want to just survive my test. I don't just want to survive it. Once I recognize what this is, I want to thrive in it. I want it to be a means of elevation and proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I want to do my very best. Whatever Allah would allow me to do within my capacity that would be pleasing to Him. So this is not your lowest common denominator. No, this is reaching much higher than that. And so we see something in the example of the Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam, that when it's known to him that his beloved son Yusuf alayhi salam, what's being sort of claimed, and of course he knows that this is not fully true, what's being claimed is that he died because, a wolf attacked him. We know that this is not true for sure, but we also know that he didn't die. And Yaqub alayhi salam also knows that he didn't die. But he knows that some of his sons got rid of one of his sons. Can you imagine any of us facing a test like this, where one of your children, your other children, basically get rid of somehow? You don't know where he is. You don't know what's happening to him. You just know that he's no longer going to be in your home by the hands of your other children. So what is the response of the Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam? And again, did he experience grief and sorrow? Absolutely. He went blind with sorrow, with sadness. But did he have despair in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Not at all, never. His response is, فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ, that, and a beautiful patience, meaning he's going to hold on to being patient for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's not just going to be any patience. He wants to hold on to it with beauty. He wants it to be, something that is not just the minimum, but something he does lovingly and surrenderingly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So again, in that you see a himma, you see a spiritual aspiration. In my hardship, my patience will not just be minimal, it's going to be beautiful patience. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us that in our hardships. Also in the example of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, in the slander of his daughter Sayyidah Aisha, our mother Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha. Now initially it's his haqq to not forgive the person who's slandering her. But ihsan is to worship Allah as though you see him. And even though you don't see him, knowing that he sees you. So when when we refuse to forgive one another, we're actually responding to each other. You are the source of my behavior. You're the motivator of my behavior, the asbab. But when he forgives this person who slandered his beloved daughter Sayyidah Aisha, now he's responding to Allah. Now he's worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because his behavior is based in, what does Allah love from me? What does he love from me most? In seeking ihsan, or seeking to beautify our deeds, this is one of the, you could say, the antidotes to another disease of the heart, or another sort of trap, which is to be distracted from Allah through our hardships, or by our hardships. To worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as though you see him. Forgiveness is something that is beloved to Allah, but how many grudges are held in the community because we can't give that up for something much less than what happened to the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, and what happened to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, and what happened to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in Ta'if, right? And what's another example that we take from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself is in Fath Mecca. How did he enter the city? He entered the city making sujood on his animal. He entered in sujood to Allah. He's responding to Allah for this opening. A companion said, today is a day of destruction. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ says, La al-yawmu yawmul marhama. Today is a day of mercy. Right? So he could have taken revenge. No one in history would have faulted the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ if he would have taken revenge on the people of the Quraysh in Mecca, who fought him on the battlefield, who plotted against him, who betrayed their contracts, who did so many evils. No one would have said that what he did was incorrect. But he chose something that was more beautiful in that time, which is mercy and forgiveness and magnanimity, which is a response to Allah, because that's what Allah wants. And if we are just looking at the asbab, we're going to be too distracted from realizing, wait, there's another response here. And this is the one that Allah loves more. This is the ihsani response. This is the beautiful response. Abu Yazid al-Bastami, he said these beautiful words. He said, I have been worshiping Allah I have been speaking to Allah for 30 years, but people think I have been speaking to them. Meaning he's constantly in a state of responding to what is happening to him in the worship of Allah. That's who he's responding to. He's not distracted. This is what ihsan can protect us from. And the final one, and I know my time is almost up, is to have loving surrender and contentment with the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The difference between us and shaitan. Shaitan says, La ilaha illallah. We say, La ilaha illallah. Right? When he says it, it doesn't mean anything for him. It's just a fact that he's actually going to fight. He's not going to acknowledge it. He's not going to be reformed by La ilaha illallah. When we say it, we're saying Allah is our goal. No matter what the hardship is, our purpose is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so when it comes to loving surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this protects us from the final D, which is to be deluded from our purpose. Delusion. Pain can sometimes show up, and all a person can think about is their pain. It's like right here. They can't see anything else. But move it out of the way. Make space for your hal to change. Put it on a shelf. Turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worship. And realize that your purpose is not this pain. The pain is something that is there for you, not against you, in your journey to your purpose, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he shows us this loving surrender when he says in Ta'if, if you are not mad at me, then I do not care. The loss that he's experienced, the difficulty, the affliction, the hardship, as long as Allah is not displeased with me, I accept this. I lovingly accept this. And he says, you have a right to test until you are pleased, right? وَلَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ الْعَلِيِّ الْعَظِيمِ, right? And there's no strength or power to do that which is beloved to Allah except through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. And so we see this again when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam loses his beloved son Ibrahim alayhi salam. Not the Prophet Ibrahim, his son Ibrahim. Correction. The Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, indeed the eyes shed tears and the heart grieves, but we will not say except what is pleasing to our Lord. So in this is an acceptance. And many times when people are going through a hardship, they can't let go. They can't accept their situation. They're resisting the qadr. Resisting the qadr and letting go does not mean giving up. Letting go does not mean, no longer having hope. Letting go means I have surrendered to the will of my Lord. If he brings about a solution that's pleasing to me and that makes me happy, that's good. If he doesn't, I accept. I lovingly accept, because my purpose is not this test. That's not my purpose. I wasn't created to save a marriage or save my children or save 1,000 other things that I'm working on. That's not the purpose of my creation. The purpose is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to not be deluded from this purpose when it comes to our hardships, we have to have loving surrender. It's said that the believer with their Lord should be like the mayyit, the dead body between the hands of the one who's washing it. Right? Meaning totally surrendered. This idea, وَأُفَوِّضُ أَمْرِي إِلَى اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ بَصِيرٌ بِالْعِبَادِ, that I turn my affair over to God, and truly God is all-seeing of his servants. My time is up, and whatever I said that is beneficial is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever I said that is wrong and mistaken is from myself and shaitan. Barakallahu fikum. Assalamu alaikum.